script too.
Hey, all the panelists are here.
Okay. You want to give 3 more minutes or get started soon?
I think we can let people in the room and just give a couple more minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I like the music, Saudi.
Thank you.
Yeah, it automatically put me in a way more relaxed
Give it a couple more.
Songs waiting
All right, I think we can get started. Sorry if you could pause the music. Okay, we'll let some other people roll in as we go throughout the presentation, but thank you everyone for joining. My name is Nahom Daniel. I am a community health navigator with the YMCA and a graduate student studying public health, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. And this panel is titled Privacy and Mistrust in Research and Healthcare, Conversations with Researchers on How to Address, Build, and Sustain Trust. And the purpose of this panel is to hopefully build empathy among researchers and healthcare providers on the reasons for mistrust among marginalized community members, and to provide a space for a community to voice concerns and ask questions. Next slide, thank you. So just to give a quick overview of the event, we are going to spend the first couple of minutes just allowing people to enter, giving an overview of the event, introducing some of the collaborating organizations, and doing a speaker introduction. And then for the next 15 minutes, we're going to do a quick word cloud activity. And then I'll give a short presentation on some of the history of abuses in medicine and research. From then, we'll spend about 30 minutes doing a moderated Q&A, and then afterwards, another 30 minutes for an open Q&A, and we'll wrap it up afterwards. And I just want to remind anyone that this is an interactive panel, so if you have any questions, just drop it in the chat, and we have someone monitoring the chat who can bring it up during the open Q&A. This panel couldn't have been possible without the YMCA, Fred Hutch, Center for AIDS Research, and the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. So I was gonna actually introduce the speakers later, but since we have a smaller crowd, I think we should go ahead and allow everyone to introduce themselves. So including the guests. So I've already went. How about you, Rahel? Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Rahel Schwartz. I work as a program executive of health equity at YMCA of Seattle, Greater Seattle. I'm also involved in HIV research work at Fred Hutch and UW.
Thank you, Rahel. You're up next, Roxanne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roxanne Karani. I'm an epidemiologist by training, and I work in the Division of Allergy and Infectious Disease at the University of Washington, and I also work with Public Health Seattle and King County in their HIV STD program.
Thank you, Roxanne. Go ahead, Stephen.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Sawyer, he, him pronouns, the executive director of POCAN, formerly known as People of Color Against AIDS Network, but I also work with CFAR and the Office of Community Engagement as a community consultant and a representative. So great to be here.
Thank you, Stephen. Dr. Paul Park.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Park, internal medicine physician and public health practitioner. I'm currently the Chief Mission Officer at Lifelong Health for All, and I also am an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Go ahead, Jane.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jane Lee, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work. So I'm a social worker by training, and my research is focused on addressing health and HIV-related inequities, including prevention and enhancing prevention behaviors in racial and ethnic minority immigrant communities. And I utilize primarily community-based participatory approaches in my work. And it's great to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Jane. Zadia, can you stop sharing for a second and let's let some of the audience introduce themselves as well? How about you, Marcus?
Okay, I can go. Hi, so my name is Marcus Conde, and I use he, him pronouns. I am the student assistant for the Center for AIDS Research, and I'm a recent graduate from the Public Health and Global Health major at the University of Washington.
Thank you, Marcus. Who's up next? Oh, you're on mute, Jasmine.
Thanks. That was a rookie mistake, huh? Good evening, everyone. My name is Jasmine Crawford, she, her, hers pronouns. I work with Marcus at the UW Fred Hutch Center for AIDS Research, as well as actually many of the faculty members and community members here this evening. It's a great honor and looking forward to an intimate conversation with you all this evening. Should be great.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Lemons. I use she, her pronouns. Who am I? I am here as a community member, but during the day, I work as a health equity coordinator for the Department of Health, and really excited to be here in this space. I'm really glad it's intimate. I love chatting with you guys. It's nice to see these faces. I'm gonna blur out my background, but I am here. You may hear my godson. He just got home from a trip. We're all excited to see him. So that being said, thank you so much for allowing us to speak as guests. I'm excited for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. How about you, Marcella?
Yeah, okay. Hi, y'all. My name is Marisela Cruz. I'm a biostatistician and assistant investigator at Kaiser Permanente Washington Health Research Institute. I'm also an affiliate assistant professor at the University of Washington Biostats Department. And for my research, most of the stuff that I do is developing statistical models to assess complex healthcare interventions. So, yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Marcella. I think last up is Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Brush. I use she, they pronouns. I do administrative support and work with patients, KP members at the Kaiser Permanente Washington Health Research Institute, same place as Marisela, and I'm excited to be here and learn with and among you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Those introductions are actually very helpful for our next activity. So most of us seem to be researchers or work in the healthcare industry. So I have a word cloud prepared for you all. And I'm going to put the link in the chats. And let me share my screen. Okay. So you can either go on the link or you can also scan the QR code on the screen. But this is going to be a word cloud and it's asking which, if any, identities do you believe you share most often with the patients and study participants with whom you've interacted? And I'm going to leave identities a bit broad so you can interpret that how you would like.
Nahum, can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
In terms of sharing, do you mean the identities that we tell participants about or the identities that we have in common with participants?
It could be both. When I see this question, I think of what we have in common as a way to connect with participants, but it's however you interpret it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, lived experience, student conditions, English as a first language, male gender, ethnicity, immigrant family. Okay. Passionate. Oh, okay. Trauma in healthcare. Interesting. Okay, I have one more question for you all. US citizen, okay. So next question. Let's see. Oh. Sorry, give me 1 second. You already beat me to the punch. So for people looking at the recording, this question is asking what sort of identities most influence your immediate impressions of patients and research participants? So we have African-American, gay male, their background, BIPOC, if they come from an underserved community, their job, their age, if they're a preacher and teacher. Oh, there's two of those actually. Okay. Parents, they come from a marginalized community, their education level. Okay. I think this is good. Thank you, everyone. Zade, you can go ahead and share the presentation again. Okay, so before we begin the moderated and open Q&A, I kind of wanted to frame this conversation. Distrust in science doesn't come out of thin air, right? Unfortunately, many of our greatest scientific and medical achievements have come at the suffering of Black people. And I want to go through a couple examples of abuses of trust and abuses of Black bodies in science and medicine to emphasize that distrust and hesitancy are not inherent qualities in marginalized groups. Rather, they're the effects of historical abuse. So the first example I want to talk about is James Marin Sims, who's often referred to as the father of modern gynecology. He was a plantation doctor in Lancaster County in South Carolina, and he's the one who developed a technique to repair fistula, and in the process developed the duckbill speculum, which you can see on the bottom right. The experiments he carried out led to the development of the modern speculum. So how did he develop it? Well, between 1845 and 1849, he conducted dozens of surgery without the consent or anesthesia on at least 12 enslaved women. And during these procedures, he would force his patients to remove all their clothing, perched on their knees naked, bending forward with their arms and heads on their arms, and do this for hours while they were screaming and crying out in pain because, again, there was no anesthesia, as nearly dozens of other doctors watched. One of these women was named Lucy, who was just 18 when she nearly died because of the painful operation, and many other enslaved women died as a result of Sims' experiments and remained nameless. Sims documented Lucy's extreme suffering in his journal, and according to his journal, Lucy didn't get any better after the surgery. In fact, he had used a sponge to drain urine from her bladder, and this resulted in her contracting a severe blood poisoning, which took months to recover from. And I chose this example because it highlights that medical practices as foundational as gynecology are often founded upon the torture and suffering of Black people in the United States. Here's another example you all are probably familiar with, Henrietta Lacks. She was a Black woman who visited Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was one of the few hospitals serving Black folks, complaining of vaginal bleeding in 1951, where upon her examination, a gynecologist found a large malignant tumor on her cervix. She ended up passing away from cervical cancer that same year, and turns out a doctor at Johns Hopkins Hospital had taken the sample of her cancerous cells while diagnosing and treating her. The doctor gave this tissue to researcher without Lacks's knowledge or consent, and it turned out her cells, called HeLa cells, which you can see on the right there, had this extraordinary ability to survive and reproduce, meaning they're essentially immortal. The researcher then distributed Lacks's cells widely to other scientists, and they became the workhorses of biological research, being used in much of modern medicine, including cancer, immunology, infectious disease, and even research against the COVID-19 vaccine. And I wanted to highlight Henrietta Lacks' story because it illustrates the racial inequalities embedded in the US research and healthcare system. Lacks was a Black woman, and her cells were taken without her consent from one of the few hospitals that even provided medical care to Black folk at the time. And then biotech industry and other companies profited from her cells and have still not passed any money to her or her family. And for decades after her death, doctors and scientists repeatedly failed to ask her family for consent to reveal Lacks' names publicly, give her medical records to the media, or even publish her genome online. Another infamous example that I want to go through is the Tuskegee Study. I'm sorry. So this is cited to be one of the main reasons for hesitancy among science and research among Black communities. Starting in 1932, 600 African-American men from Macon County, Alabama, were enlisted to participate in a scientific experiment on syphilis, with the goal of this study to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in Black populations. But the subjects were unaware of this and were simply told they were receiving treatment for bad blood, when in actuality, they received no treatment at all. Even after penicillin was discovered to be a safe and reliable cure for syphilis, the majority of men did not receive it. In fact, the researchers went out of their way to ensure that men in the study did not receive any treatment. For example, in 1934, researchers provided doctors in that county with a list of subjects and asked them not to be treated specifically. And the same thing was done in 1940 with the Alabama Health Department. Then in 1941, researchers went as far as removing men who were drafted in the military rather than letting their syphilis be treated in order to enlist. Even after several ethical principles were in, such as the Nuremberg Code or the Declaration of Helsinki, which were both aimed at protecting humans from experimentation, the CDC actively decided to continue this study. It wasn't until a whistleblower exposed this study to the New York Times in 1972 that the study finally ended. And by this time, only 74 patients were alive, 128 died of syphilis or its complications, 40 of their wives were infected, and 19 of their children acquired congenital syphilis. So we've gone through some of the major examples of abuse in research and healthcare throughout history. So what's changed? Over 70 years later, Henrietta Lacks' family still has not received any compensation for the HeLa cells that were taken from her. And they're currently in the process of suing a scientific instrumental supplier for making millions off unjust enrichment. After discussions with the NIH, an agreement was reached with the family where Henrietta Lacks' genome would be only limited to researchers rather than the general public, at a concern of privacy for the rest of the family's genetic sequence. For the Tuskegee experiments, those actually did lead to led to the government changing its research practices directly. In 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law, which created the National Commission for Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And this group identified basic principles and research conduct. And regulations were also passed that required researchers to get the voluntary informed consent of all people participating in a study. And since then, many regulations, ethical principles, and advisory boards, such as the ones listed on the screen, have been created. But this is not to say that everything is magically fixed now because of these advisory boards, right? Though these policies have been created to avoid the outright abuse of people in research and medicine, things are far from being equitable. Many of the advisory commissions that I've mentioned are not representative of the population surveyed in studies, and they often consist of older white researchers. And even with policy changes, racism in research is still prevalent. You may be familiar with this article that popped up, where two French doctors suggested that on live television, the potential COVID-19 vaccine should be tested in Africa first rather than other nations. And one of the doctors was saying that because Africans do not use masks, they don't have treatment or intensive care, and they're highly likely to be exposed and don't protect themselves, they should be the first ones to be tested on. And I think this example kind of illustrates that there's still this idea of treating Black folk as guinea pigs within research. So I hope that that presentation kind of framed that this conversation we're going to have in a bit, and it shows that communities have just reason to have hesitancy towards research, right? And it's not an inherent quality within communities. There's reasons of historical abuse and current medical and research racism that contribute to this. So Zade, what I'm gonna have you do is end the presentation so we can see all the panelists and we can begin the moderated Q&A. Perfect, thank you. All right, moment of truth. My first question to everyone, how do clinicians and researchers perpetuate distrust and hesitancy among community members? And I'll pass it on to Roxanne since you're already unmuted.
Thanks, Nahum. Excuse me. Well, I think one of the things that researchers are guilty of, and really by way of the funding structure for research in the US, is not including representative samples of participants in research and not doing due diligence in terms of trying to recruit a representative sample. People who aren't given the opportunity to participate in research will continue to feel unsure or have that sense of mistrust about it. And I think that this is something that we can all do a lot better with, is trying to do a better job of recruiting and making sure that our funders understand the complexities of trying to recruit people who really reflect the communities that we work with, versus recruiting the people for whom it's easy to participate in research, or for whom it doesn't spark such a sense of mistrust or anxiety. And I think that we have a long way to go on that front. I'm interested to hear what other people have to say about this.
Yeah, I agree with Roxanne. I would also add that, research in and of itself is oftentimes not clearly linked to a direct benefit to the community from which we are trying to identify research subjects. Sometimes that link is actually there, it's just poorly explained. And sometimes the link is insignificant. And so I think that communication of the direct benefits needs to be better. But I also think that when approaching, especially a marginalized community, and saying, hey, we would like to do research, I think that's already a misstep. I think the first step should have been, as an institution, whether it's an academic institution or a research body, to ask the question, what do you need? Like, what are the gaps in healthcare delivery? And it should be, a mutual relationship where research is just one component of the relationship. I think when research is driving everything, it's defining the entire relationship. Certainly, even if there is a perceived benefit, the researchers can be seen as, oh, they're coming to us again because they like us, and that's it. And so I think there needs to be a more balanced, symbiotic relationship.
I would also jump in and echo that. I think there has to be this connection, right, with the communities that we're seeking to serve through the research. But I also think that it's broader in this. It needs to be broader in the sense that oftentimes the communities that we're seeking to serve, we have to have representation in the research staff that look like them, that can be our trusted partners in community, right? That can step in the gap and that can that have, right, this already trust of community, right? And that can explain in ways the benefit of what the research might be in ways that the community can understand and can can connect with. I think that's a critical piece of that. I don't think we do enough of that type of connection. And I know oftentimes it is motivated through the funding, right? And the timeline of what we need to get done. But there has to be this development of community and the researcher, and that process is really critical.
Roxanne and Paul, you mentioned that, you know, researchers aren't reaching out to communities because either they view it as difficult or there's no benefit for community members to participate in those studies. So I'm curious, with your personal experience, how have you kind of gathered those folks? What have you done to make it beneficial for them, or to I guess get past that difficulty, like you mentioned, Roxanne?
I think that one thing that I have found immensely helpful is to translate materials into the languages that the people that I'm hoping to recruit use, so that they have materials that they can read and feel comfortable with. I also think sometimes it just takes extra time to talk to people and sort of understand their concerns. I mean, this is getting a little bit at what Stephen was saying, but I mean, in the moment when you're talking with a potential participant, it may just mean taking some extra time to ask questions about what people may be concerned about, or if they have had experience with research before. And sometimes having that kind of background knowledge can help with that conversation.
I would add that making sure that the engagement of the partnership as a whole, again, that research is, you know, research can be a critical component, but it shouldn't necessarily be the only component. There's certainly many ways to support and engage and partner. It doesn't just have to be research. And so I think being able to take a step back and having a broader vision of defining the partnership, what is our strategy when establishing a partnership and establishing trust. So I think if there's a comprehensive package that includes the interests of all parties, I think we'll be more successful.
To build off what Paul was saying, I think kind of you're highlighting how engagement can really be this continuum. And I think really thinking about that critically is important, because we can engage communities in these haphazard or kind of surface level ways. And I think that is a way that we can perpetuate some of the distrust that we see in communities. So really thinking about engagement, not necessarily just for your research project, or, oh, I have this study that I need to kind of involve community members for, and just kind of reaching out in that way can kind of lead to some hesitancy in certain communities. So I totally agree with you that thinking about engagement first, building that relationship, building the trust and rapport, you know, initially at the individual level, to really demonstrate that you have shared goals, and then that can potentially lead to research studies or projects that is really developed from the needs and the priorities of the communities that we want to serve.
Yeah, just to add on what Jen said, usually researchers often target vulnerable populations as study participants because, you know, they believe that these individuals are less likely to question them. So for example, like, you know, people always talk about the fact that researchers often reach out to maybe the homeless community or prisoners or children or the elderly, usually like under-resourced communities when recruiting for studies, and using money as an incentive, you know, to make sure that marginalized populations will volunteer to participate in you know, research studies. And the fact that, approaching communities without a pre-existent, relationship with them to a community who are already, who mistrust and who do not trust the the healthcare providers or researchers, it usually fails. And I think one of the most important thing also in any research study, there has to be bidirectional relationship from the researchers and the community members. As a public health professional, I always say that these communities have resources. They do not lack knowledge. There are doctors, researchers, they're rich. They just don't have the ability to get resources or for information. So when researchers approach, underserved or marginalized communities, they have to be open-minded in building that relationship, not so much to come into like, we're doing this research and we're gonna save you. It's like, how could we work together so that we can support? And also, I think providing adequate information also is so critical, because population already think that researchers are dishonest and they don't trust them. So when we are creating a consent form, we just got to make sure that, like Roxanne said, that it is translated in a way that the community members understand everything from the beginning until the end, and also making sure that they're part of it even after the research is done, to follow up and see what was discovered. I think that is a major factor in order to rebuild trust, with medical providers or researchers.
Rahel, do you feel that researchers working with local community-based organizations and grassroots organizations is a good way to get access to the community? And if so, how can researchers effectively work with these organizations?
I think Jane and everyone mentioned this, few minutes ago. I think the, trust is, generated and maintained through repeated interaction and a long-term relationship. If we don't build that relationship prior to approaching communities to conduct research, then usually, nothing is going to work out. But what we have to also understand is the purpose of approaching communities is not to use communities. We have to work together. We have to, from the beginning until the end and continuously. So I think, creating some type of relationship and finding out what their immediate needs are. Even though we believe, we can, as scientists, as public health professionals, we always look at data and we say, this community needs, they're affected by diabetes. So what they need right now is some type of intervention to prevent them from, getting diabetes. But the problem is, if that community is affected by so many other social determinants of health, if they're not able to feed their children, if there are housing issues, if they are, so many different things, research is the last thing that we would like to discuss with them. So I think building relationship through addressing those issues, then, that could lead into, when it is time to do research, people will be open to participate if they trust that you have good intentions.
Thank you, Rahel. So I'm curious, how does distrust, hesitancy, and just a lack of access to marginalized communities affect the research process as a whole?
Well, I think that we spoke already about there not being equitable representation among research subjects. And so I think, the argument could be made that in addition to research study teams needing to do a better job to be more inclusive, I think that the distrust is an additional barrier that the research community of the past has and present have created. So it's kind of, they've created the barrier they're trying to overcome. And so I think distrust makes inclusion more difficult. So yeah, I think that's one impact of distrust.
And I think it's reiterating kind of what we emphasize, because relationships are so important for research. And if distrust is kind of part of those relationships, they'll ultimately affect it and lead to a lot of issues and challenges throughout. So I think really acknowledging that across any study, even if we might think that we are integrating approaches to address potential distrust, I think it still needs to be acknowledged and discussed, even among research staff and in the planning process, because it's a big component, because distrust is really rooted in structural racism, and we need to really acknowledge that more and recognize that and have that to be part of the conversation from the inception of a study to the end. And it really needs to be a continuous part of what we do and think about.
I'm just going to jump right on the back of that, Jane. Thank you for that. I think even as we have this conversation, right, I think we were going around the major issue for distrust, right? Is this particularly in underserved communities of color, BIPOC community, right? It is this baked in racism, right? That's structural, that's systematic, that really has brought about this mistrust. And so we have to institute strategies, right, that will help to break down that mistrust and to bring a community in a way that they can know that they can trust us, and that the research that we're trying to do is going to positively affect them. I mean, when you think about it, I was thinking, childbirth, the vaccination among children, HIV, cancer, substance use disorder, all of these things disproportionately affect communities of color. And it's not that they don't want to see systems and programs that address those. It's not that they don't want interventions to address them, right? But they want those interventions that address them to be perfectly fit for them, right? And so how then we convince them that, the research that we're doing will benefit them? Well, we have to build those relationships over time. And I also think it oftentimes our funding streams, right, don't match the work that we need to do in these communities to build that trust and to lay that foundation to have better outcomes.
I have a personal experience. My daughter is a cancer survivor, and when we were at Seattle Children's, I wanted to, we were asked to, for my child to participate in some research. And as a mother, And also, I believe in science, even though I have my my own skepticism. And she has been part of some, research. And my hope was that after she was done with her treatment and years go by, I've never heard anything, what has happened with the research. I never was informed if anything came out of it, except a couple of years ago. This was that 5 years out. Now she's in the survivorship clinic. I was, someone called me to ask me, they want to do a follow-up, and if I was willing to come back, and they wanted to see how she's doing. And I didn't want to participate anymore. But what I have told them is, I don't know what has happened with what you have, collected from her. I mean, did it help? Did it help you come up with better treatment? Nothing. So there was no relationship created after the initially after they approached me. So, I say that to say, these are areas where when I was there, I thought, well, this would help somebody else along the line. Cancer treatment is horrible. The treatment itself causes so many other health issues that my daughter is still now experiencing. So if there is any possibility that me offering to be part of this research could help another kid, of course I would be happy to. But to this day, after I refused, nobody has reached out to me to inform me. So these are the things that, makes things more and more complicated when it comes to research and community members. As a Black woman, I have my own hesitancy, but as a public health professional, I also understand the benefit of, research. So it puts me in a very weird position.
Thank you for sharing, Rahel. So you all mentioned how important it is to build a relationship between community members and researchers, and doing this for a long time is the only way to really gain trust among community members. I'm curious, rather than an individual researcher or research projects, what can be done on more of an organizational level or system level, or even policy or funding level, like Stephen mentioned, to gain the trust of community members?
I'll take a stab at that. I've always really wondered if some sort of office, similar to what we have in CFAR for the Office of Community Engagement, would work on a university level. So the University of Washington has some office that has ties with community members and community-based organizations, and serves to help build those relationships and sort of as a matchmaker. Versus, I think one of the problems that I struggle with is that communities that are marginalized are often asked to participate in a lot of different research studies. And so they're inundated with researchers coming to them and saying, I want to include your community in this study, or I want to do this study with your community. And it feels like if there were some more structural way of handling those requests, or having someone at the university level that could serve as a go-between, it might moderate some of that overburdening of communities, I guess, for lack of a better word.
I also think this isn't going to necessarily answer the question, but I also think instead of really thinking about it in a way where we say, how can we get individuals or participants to trust us, or how can we get them to be more trusting, maybe we should be asking, how can organizations and systems be more equitable and inclusive so that we're not trying to get them to trust us because we know there are all these issues or challenges that would cause somebody to not want to participate in a study or not want to engage with researchers. So really, how can we change our organizations and systems and institutions to be more inclusive and equitable is kind of how I think about the question. And I think there are lots of different ways we can start to do that, and with the goal of equity and inclusion, rather than the goal of we need to do this so that we can have, marginalized communities want to participate in our studies. So I think just kind of approaching it in that way can help us to think about more actionable solutions that are sustainable rather than, addressing these holes or problems that we just want to put a Band-Aid on.
And I would say I've had the opportunity to speak at a number of local hospitals to first year, second year residents. I've been in the medical field for over 25 years now. And what I say in those talks is that I think somewhere along the way, we lost the idea of the work that we're doing, particularly in medicine, right? And I think that includes research as being both a science and an art. That art piece is critically when you're dealing with people, right? That we have to know how to connect with different cultures and different peoples and know how to be empathetic to their situations and circumstances and where they are. And I don't think enough of that training happens, at the collegiate level, right? That it's all science. It's all about, the science of the thing, but, there has to be an art to it when we're working with people or when we're working, if we're not directly working with people, if we're working to advance the quality of life for people.
I just want, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Rahel?
I think one thing that I would like to add, I think me and Nahum actually spoke about this as we participated in the stigma reduction research work with Roxanne. We've been working. I don't think researchers they assume that community members understand, despite the historical abuse of research on Black people, about like the HIPAA rules and privacy rules. People don't understand. And a lot of the hesitancy in participating anything medically related is because people don't believe that their information is private, or and I think that's one of the things we always say we need to do a workshop, because we work with different communities to promote chronic disease prevention programs, and sometimes we would have a mobile mammogram screening event, and we have such a hard time enrolling people, and because people are so afraid that the information that we collect, it's going to go somewhere, somebody's going to misuse it. And I think researchers have to, that is the part that usually researchers miss, but that is one of the major issue for communities of color, especially immigrant communities. I'm Ethiopian, and I know how to communicate with my community members, and that's the one thing. No matter how many times that we try to educate them. They don't trust that their information is safe when they, in dealing with, healthcare providers or researchers, especially when they don't trust, those community members. So the chance of them participating in anything is highly unlikely. So we always, education is everything, information is everything. So not so much to push people to participate, but giving them information that this is how your information is protected. These are the benefits of research. And this is how you are going to help us, as a team, not this is how I am going to do this for you. This is how we're gonna plan, we're gonna strategize, we're gonna work together to make sure that you will benefit from this. And if at any point that you change your mind, you also have the freedom just to, quit. And those are the information that a lot of community members do not understand, or and researchers also assume that community members have that information and understanding.
Thank you, Rahel. Paul, you went off mute earlier. Do you have something?
Yes, I just wanted to add that, trust takes a lot of time. I think, we focus mostly on the researchers. I think the physicians, especially primary care physicians, could play a critical role in bridging that relationship and bridging that divide. Hopefully, primary care physicians have, through proper representation, but also through just proper training and knowledge and bedside manner, have been able to build good relationships with their patients and building that trust. And I think having the primary care physician explain and communicate these studies on behalf of the research team, I think that's one way to try to bridge that gap, because there is trust. And obviously that there's a responsibility on the primary care physician to be honest and to truly understand the study and make sure it is appropriate and of value to the individual in front of them. So that's one approach I think that could be helpful. Another idea that comes to mind is, I think the traditional randomized control trial has, from my experience, it does alienate and turn away a lot of people who are trying to understand why they would want to participate, and understanding that, if they're in the control group, that there's potentially no perceived benefit or risk. But, I know from the scientific perspective, the randomized control trial, the traditional randomized control trial is valuable, it's clean, etc. But the reality is, I think the scientific community has still done a poor job communicating its value. And then also, there are other studies that, maybe don't have all the advantages of a traditional randomized control trial, such as there's a step wedge randomized control trial where eventually everyone in the control group does receive the intervention eventually. And again, we don't need to get into the disadvantages of doing that, but I'm sure they are there. But anyway, just a thought that I think, there's a obsession, which maybe is valid, of always doing a randomized control trial, which I think can be difficult for communities that already have distrust.
I would echo that. I think from my perspective too, just to add to it, is that when you're working with a community that's, and I don't like marginalized, but I say underserved, oftentimes offering some benefit, right, no matter what side you're on, is a better perspective for folk, that they don't feel like, so there's a win-win in the situation, that folk can take away something, right? Because they're already, you know, underserved and at risk in so many different ways, in so many different layers. It creates another level of distrust, right? When I feel like, okay, now I didn't get that, you know, and so being able to balance that with communities that we know, particularly that are very underserved or marginalized, I think is a way to approach it that I think that is more equitable.
Go ahead, Roxanne.
I want to circle back a little bit. I think this is actually more relevant to the first question you asked us, Nahom, but I think that Stephen brought up the funding streams before, but I think that the way the scientific process works in the US also does not help with this process. So in the project that I've been working with Nahom and Rahel on, we've submitted a grant to continue the work. I think we're on our third or fourth grant application and it's not getting funded. And it's hard to maintain those relationships when you don't have ongoing work and you don't have anything really to bring to the community when you're between the funded projects. And I don't really know what the answer is to that, but it's hard to sustain the interest and keep the trust when the communities feel like they've done, you know, they've helped you and they participated in the research and they want to see something come of it, or like our next step would be an intervention. And we haven't gotten to the intervention yet because we can't get the funding for the intervention. So it's frustrating. And I think that that doesn't help with building these relationships at all.
I agree with you, Roxanne. And I think for me, what has been confusing to me is, I believe it's a lack of representation where people, you know, those grantors, I mean, if there are no people that look like me, know the community, work in the community, really the qualification is written based on whoever think might work. And you know, to be funded to do the formative data research, and we did. And then then we came up with this idea based on our research in, you know, qualitative and quantitative data. This is what we believe would work with these communities who have been willingly participating to be part of this project. Now we're stuck because then why would we be funded to do the data collection and not funded to implement the project? That does not make sense to me. And like you said, I mean, thankfully, we're still engaged with the same communities that we have been involving with this research. So my hope is that, like, you know, we won't lose it, you know, that relationship, but it's still, you know, people would ask, what happened to, like, you know, what are you guys doing now? Or, you know, and I think when we were at when we went for a conference and we were able to participate with the grantors from CDC and NIH, one of the things I said was, there aren't that many public health professionals or community members part of that conference, other than, I think we probably were the first people to participate. It's only researchers and the grantors, and there were not that many people that look like us. So it kind of also gave me an opportunity to actually see, well, this is one of the reasons, because there's no connection with the people who are working, doing the work in the community, and the funders who control, you know, giving out these resources. So it is really frustrating, but, you know, I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Rahel, and everyone else for sharing some of the systemic level changes that can be done. And also highlighting that trust is a continuum between researchers, CBOs, and primary providers. So I want to take these last 20 minutes and give the audience an opportunity to speak, voice their thoughts on any of the questions asked, or ask any questions to the panelists. You can raise your hand, unmute, drop it in the chat, whatever is most comfortable.
I'll just chime in. For those who I haven't formally met, my name's Jasmine, and I work on staff at the UW Fred Hutch CFAR. But I'm speaking really this evening as a member of our broader community, because I don't have a scientific background. And I'll just highlight what's really resonating, of course, is our need to have more inclusive institutions, whether they be major funding institutions like the NIH, having a sustained vehicle for funding community engagement, which is a conversation we've been having a lot within CFAR, so that community engagement is not project specific. It is funded as a continuum, and also that organizations are funding for the administrative report required to nurture and grow relationships. I think that those relationships should be shared by everyone, not just researchers, but there are so many ways so many roles that all of us can play within the research and I think community development processes. So definitely funding, infrastructure problems, university community infrastructure problems. I really liked what you were saying, Paul, about the role of the primary care physician as sort of a first line of communication for folks with health as a potentially scientific endeavor. And I will just say, I've had, like, as an individual, I've had my blend of experiences with my own primary physicians and certainly my kids' pediatricians. Wonderful relationship with our pediatrician. In time, we've had the chance to have more conversations that are revelatory, that support her in supporting my family. But I've definitely had my share of conversations where it's become clear that she has biases that affect her approach to the recommendations she makes. Things like, it'd be great if your kid is involved in different recreational activities, right? To nurture their mind and spirit. If they're not signed up for these sort of classes, get them signed up. And what I didn't want to tell her in front of my very hardworking partner is, like, we're actually, like, underemployed in this household right now. We can't afford, we're not in a position to be able to afford those activities, right? And I mean, on the one hand, I was glad she viewed us as someone who's had the capacity to do that, but it was just sort of interesting how bias crept into that conversation, right? And how it just affected really her perspective on a solution, or the solution she would offer for a particular goal. On the flip side, she's also shared that she personally, as well as members of her family, have had learning challenges that are similar to members of my family. And so that has really, her ability to connect, I think, to be vulnerable, to be human, to find the points of intersection in our identities really builds my trust that she understands me and has also, faced similar questions. And I think opens the door for more sharing between us. So I guess that's just a really long way of sort of building on Paul's point about the role of primary care physicians, providers, maybe even social workers, like the roles they could potentially play within our larger institutions as access points to help build trust and relationships. And then I think, like, third, I just am hearing that of course we want to improve our systems. And I'm just curious, how do we get those conversations started? Like, even if it's just like a researcher sitting down and, while they're taking, doing some preliminary queries to identify if a potential participant is a fit or interested, like, how do we even like structure 2 to 5 minutes within that interaction to make sure an open conversation happens? Because the other thing that can be learned is beyond the focus of that study and whether that participant is a viable participant, is whether there are other issues that might actually help to shape the direction of the study, or other issues that are related to, the topic of this study that could be like really germane to the direction in which the science goes, and certainly even the direction that particular relationship goes. So I guess I'm just saying, like, I'm just sitting here wondering, how do we get more conversations going? What does that take? And I'll end there. I'm curious for also the folks on the line from Kaiser, what sort of conversations are your organizations having around community engagement? And yeah, how do the needs of community get considered in your approaches?
Hi, this is Sarah B. from Kaiser Research Institute. And if Maricela is still on the line, I'd love to hear their perspective as well, because we work in different areas. But I shared a comment in the chat about I work in the patient engagement part of the Institute. It's kind of unique because we're not doing like clinical trial research, we're doing learning health system research. So we're like operating in our delivery system in a more like quality improvement capacity. And so when we're thinking about community, we're kind of approaching from the like within the KP member community, which is a diverse community, but I think it's just like a context kind of definition that's important. It's not working with like, a broader community like regional, or thinking about community in different ways that we identify socially. But Jasmine, I really appreciated and wanted to lift up like 2 things you said really hit me. I mentioned in the chat that like vulnerability is a really important aspect of I think like relationship building and moving at the pace of trust as like a bidirectional part of the work that I do. And so I work with folks who have chronic pain, and chronic pain affects like every aspect of your life: physiological, mental, social, and we have like ongoing long-term relationships with the folks that we work with on our research project. And they work with us from like every aspect of the project. Like they help us with our recruitment and designing materials to help people like enter into our intervention, but they also help us write papers and disseminate. And I think that that's been really valuable. But like the way that we got to do that was through funding. and we have like a particular funding mechanism that allows us to engage members and treat them really well as like collaborators and co-investigators in a way. And I think like what's difficult in the clinical trial space is that like the getting people on board for that level of development, like getting people on board for recruitment is usually unfunded work and is really challenging. So just really appreciated like your mention of funding is an important part of that and vulnerability. So thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah and Jasmine, for sharing your personal experiences. I really appreciate that. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Hi, I hope I did not cut off anybody. But hello, everyone. Again, my name is Michelle Lemons. I use she, her pronoun. Thank you so much for this panel. It was so informational, and I really appreciated all of the questions and the stories that were shared, personal and professional. I was trying to think about the best way to ask this question, but I'm just gonna go for it. I love the people who were brought together for this panel. I think it's extremely diverse in experience, ethnicity, backgrounds, all of that jam, beautiful. But sometimes it comes up for me as I see us, and I'm gonna say us, people of color, people who live in those marginalized spaces, always going up for us in our communities. And I'm wondering, what's the experience trying to move these community engagement practices within these predominantly white spaces? And everything you said on behalf of like community and the experiences that we've had, I think is on point. But I guess I'm wondering from the inside perspective of like, how is that going for you? Like, is it challenging? Has it gotten better? Like, do you find more allies in the work? I think that's the question coming up for me. I hope it makes sense.
Jane, were you going to say something?
I have a lot of thoughts on that too. I know where you're getting at, and I have a lot of thoughts, but I think I'm gonna kind of not like keep it positive, but I think, there have been a lot more discussions around these issues, which I do appreciate. Do I think sometimes they are just surface level and just kind of, we're just having these conversations just to have these conversations without real changes or without real action? Sometimes yes, but I do have hope that, we are kind of continuing to do this work, and some of us have more opportunities because it's being more recognized that we need to focus on equity and inclusion and diversity. So there are positives that come from it, but I do think, I'm exhausted from it. And I'm sure a lot of us are, because we've been doing this for a long time, and yet we have to face a lot of additional challenges. But I think what I was thinking about as you're talking is like, oh, well, I do this because it actually brings me joy, and it actually brings me strength. So that's what continues to kind of, I think for most of us, push us forward in this work, even if, some of the other groups that we might be embedded in, or the systems, even though they might be a little bit slower to change. I think just keeping that hope and momentum and finding others to kind of build that camaraderie and support with and connect with, like the community organizations that I work with, I get so much strength from them, and I hope they get strength from me. And so that's kind of, those are my initial reactions, but I totally feel you and what you're kind of asking.
I was just going to say that I think, at least in terms of the CFAR, since the time that I've been here, I think that things have really changed in a positive direction, although it probably from the outside feels like it's really slow change. It has been slow, but the restructuring that Stefan Wallace has done with the Office of Community Engagement over the last 2 or 3 years, I think has been fantastic and really is steering us in the right direction. And I would say for my own home division in the School of Medicine, there has definitely been a lot more focus on finding fellows and trainees that represent the communities that live here in King County. And so I think that's also a step in the positive direction, because definitely one thing that we still struggle with is representation. And that has a huge impact on our ability to do research. So I think that there's movement. It's kind of hard to be patient sometimes, and it does get really frustrating. But there is change, and so we have to hold on to that.
I want to add that I work for the YMCA, and being part of the, me and Nahum have been part of the research, the HIV research program with Roxanne and Dr. Rena. And for the first time, as I am, even though I do believe in science, I am one of the most skeptical person that I know. Initially, when Dr. Rena approached our community to do, a research on stigma reduction on HIV, the first thing that I've asked her was, I want to sit with her and go through the grants that they wrote. And I want to make sure that nothing was written without, we have the ability to change if there's something that we didn't like. And we sat for a couple hours at a coffee shop, and we went through together, and that transparency, and also them inviting us. I work on behalf of the Ethiopian Community Center. And then there was another fellow from the Eritrean Community Center. We were part of everything from the beginning now, and we are part of, we contribute to, we're part of everything, creating the education, translating, recruiting participants for interviews or focus group. We facilitated in our own space in a way that was convenient for our people. What has also surprised us as stigmatized that HIV is in our community, creating that space, have opened up. Some of our focus groups went on for like 3 hours, which was scheduled for 45 minutes, because people, for one thing, we are giving them information that people did not even know, but we're communicating like it is us. They look like us. We speak the same language. We kind of designed it in a way that it's not frightening, but they trust us. So I think being part of it, it has opened a lot of opportunities for us. And like Roxanne said, the Office of Community Engagement at Fred Hutch that Dr. Wallace created, me and Nahum are part of the community consultative group. We review research proposals. We help researchers kind of not leading them, but give feedback to how to approach communities. And I think we have a long way to go, but I think I feel hopeful that the more and more people are involved, not only in, I'm not a doctor or a researcher, but as a community member first, and then as a public health professional working for a nonprofit organization, where our organization is built on relationship building and working for an organization, and then also having the support of, you know, the scientific community, and having this, you know, building this relationship will open up more opportunities for more community members to be involved, and for more community members also to learn, so that we can, you know, we can guide all these research that are, you know, going on, so that we can benefit from them without our communities, you know, being harmed.
Thank you, Rahel. And thank you, Michelle. That was a great question. And I saw kind of that relief from all the panelists when they heard that question, because being a person of color, coming from underserved or underrepresented community, you do have to kind of burden that weight and represent your community a lot. So I appreciate that question. It is 8:30, so that is time for this panel. I want to thank all the panelists so much for taking time out of their day to attend this conversation. I really appreciated this conversation. I felt like I learned a lot. And I hope that, you know, the panelists and the audience members felt that as well. And there's a couple of thank yous in the chat. Thank you, everyone. So this event was recorded. It's going to be posted on the Center for AIDS Research, CFAR YouTube channel, also the YMCA of Greater Seattle's YouTube channel, and the YMCA Greater Seattle's Health Equity Department's YouTube channel as well, if any of you want to check out the recording. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to all the panelists, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.